Hope everybody is doing well. It is another May day here in Durham, North Carolina, and I'm over here enjoying some of the weather. And of course, I was doing some of my various jobs during the course of this week. So earlier I was at the Hayti Heritage Center, and later on I'll be there again because they've actually got yoga classes on Wednesday. On Monday, they've got the um, African dance for women class. So that is always fun to watch the ladies coming by and learning about African dance. And of course, the drummers are there as well. So it is oftentimes a high energy activity that is on that particular day. And I have stepped outside a couple of times and noticed that it's some pretty good weather here. And we actually dodged a storm literally because I thought that they had said that yesterday we would be having some severe thunderstorms, but I never saw any signs or sight of those. So they must have veered to the left, or maybe they veered to the right, but they definitely veered out of the way because I never saw any signs or sight of those storms that they had said were going to be coming when we had that storm warning and all in that space. And of course, folks are paying attention to a number of things that are happening around the world and, of course, in their lives in general. So, of course, at the online dinner party, we always invite amazing guests and they often have amazing conversations about a variety of things, including some things that folks will find interesting in the business space and in the entrepreneurial space and even in the entertainment and cultural spaces as well. As a matter of fact, earlier I was talking to one of the guests about science fiction and military, and it mentioned that one of my relatives had retired from the military and is now doing that contract work. So he's really enjoying the work that he's doing in the contract space. I think in some of these new high tech kind of things that have to do with AI and a lot of other things that I don't even totally have a understanding of because he is using some of that background he had, which I think was in logistics and in engineering to actually work in those fields. So he's telling me about all these wonderful things at a very sad occasion that we had several months ago, but he was telling me about the things that he is doing in that consulting space now. And of course, I am also been a fan of science fiction for a number of years, having been both a Star Trek and a Star Wars fan, and have even enjoyed the Avatar movies and, of course, the Black Panther movies as well. So definitely have thought about that, but had never really thought about, even though a lot of them have a military style background, including the ways that the soldiers are fighting and the whole good versus evil kind of narrative of many of the science fiction, but I had never really thought about a military aspect. But then I've got a gentleman that might tell me how he got involved in science fiction and whether he was a science fiction fan all along or how that all played out in his life. So I'm going to bring in retired Lieutenant Colonel, and definitely going to bring him in to share some of his thoughts. And that is Alexander Tambashi. And he said I can call him Geister because that's a better way than most people know him as, and all in that space. So I'm definitely glad to have him on and all along those lines. So definitely one of the first questions I was going to ask you is, have you always been involved in this notion of science fiction? Is this something that you picked up later? And I've also got to tease you because as we were talking earlier, I'm going like, wait a minute, this is a man that literally fell through floors of buildings. I don't know how you managed to through floors of buildings, but you managed to do that, and you also managed to get pitched by a pitchfork. So I'm going like, we've got to talk about these things because our listeners are going to want to know how the heck did he manage to do all of this stuff and why is he doing these things? And I thought military was supposed to be about safety, but apparently you were having one of those unsafe moments as well.
Well, first, let me thank you, Mr. Lee, for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you. To answer your question, I have always been a science fiction fan. I have been a diehard science fiction and anime fan. I mean, the way I look at it, if you're a sci-fi fan, you're an anime fan. You just can't be one or the other. Um, so especially the military sci-fi has always been my favorite genre in the sci-fi world, and I have just started getting into the dark urban fantasies. Those are I'm starting to like those, but always been a sci-fi fan. And you asked how did me become an author happen?
Right.
Well, uh, I am personal friends with a science fiction author named Jonathan Yanez. He does Gateway to the World book series, Hunter for Hire, and Mercenaries Forsaken. Writes all these books, so he's very famous. And when I was diagnosed as terminal, and I said, hey, I went to him and I said, hey, Jonathan, would you make me a character in your book? And he did that. And but during the process, we were talking back and forth, talking about my times. He said, you really need to write this down. You need to write a story. And I'm like, Jonathan, I'm a sci-fi guy. I can't write a autobiography and make it anything interesting someone would want to read. So he said to me, he says, you know who Kirk Vonnegut is? I go, of course I do. And he says, you do realize his book Brave New World was his autobiography in a sci-fi setting. And I said, I didn't know that. I mean, I look at the book now in a totally different way.
Right.
And he said, well, if Kirk Vonnegut can do it, why can't you? And that's sort of how my book started on that. So it's literally real factual events happening set in a sci-fi backdrop. And I will admit, between events, there are fictional things that happen between them, the real events, just to get the story going, but a lot of things happen. Very embarrassing things. I had a personal friend named Sergeant Sarah Goodell. She was helping me during the book, and she's known me for 25 years, and we served together. And she was there for most of my interesting adventures. And she's like, "Well, you need to talk about this. You need to talk about that." So I'll talk about the most what people are probably most wondering first is the pitchfork.
Yeah.
I was in Germany on top of my tank in a hay field, and I went to go reach for my coffee on the turret, and I didn't really make sure I had a good foothold, and I fell in a haystack right on top of a pitchfork.
Mm. Managed to land on that pitchfork some kind of way or another, and all in that space. They say that everybody has the great American novel in them. I was actually in a clubhouse room and was sharing some of my family history, including grandma being one of the folks that founded a library here in Raleigh, and also being one of the first minorities to go to Columbia University in library science and all in that space. And as I was telling these stories, some folks were like, "You do know that that's a movie, and that's a movie, and they need to be made into that, or I need to have you on the lecture circuit." Because one of the people I was talking to was a college professor, and I was going like, "No, our family is very much modest," but I do hear people oftentimes saying that everybody has a novel in them, and sometimes the novels don't come out till there is a kind of a traumatic event, whether that's like you just mentioned yourself being terminal. And I know some other people that have written books that are kind of like their final gift to the world. I'm thinking about it, and I can't think of the title of it, but it was a book that was about a person that was given advice after they had realized that they were terminal. So do you always think that you're going to be an author, or there's some of these things push you into being more of an author?
Well, a couple things for pushing me to be an author. One, Jonathan Yanez was a big influence, but also as I talked to Sergeant Goodell, another friend of mine, Sergeant Hoyt, and he's a Marine, Goodell's Army, and talking about my PTSD treatment, trying to deal with things, and I found writing my life story in a book was very cathartic. It forces me to, oh, for the civilians in the audience, we train in the military. When something happens, you put it in a box, and you have this giant warehouse in the back of your brain. You throw it in the back of the warehouse, and you forget about it. And in writing the book, you have to go to that warehouse. You have to pull that box out, and you have to open it, and you have to deal with what's in there. And Sergeant Goodell, who's known me, she's like, "Well, you're a completely different person," because it took me 1 year to write this book. And she said, "You're a completely different person now than you were a year ago."
Mm.
And she says, "You do things that you would not have done a year ago." And I said, "Like what?" She goes, "Well, you just started deciding to become a digital artist and learning Illustrator and things like that." She goes, "You would have never done that a year ago." I'm like, "Well," I mean, she had a point. And it made me, get more involved, more personal. I mean, some people write books with the whole hope it gets published, it gets read.
Yeah.
I wrote my book as not a testament. I'm not using the right word. Um, I'll say it this way. My book is written to help people who have similar issues with me and how to cope with it, how to go on. I talk in my book about PTSD, being away from home, uh, doing your first kill, what it feels like when you kill someone for the first time, both distance and hand to hand. And I talk about these things, and I know I have fellow brothers and sisters serve. They have the same PTSD. If you haven't, if they can pick up my book and read it, and besides enjoying it, but just can read it and say, hey, this guy's been through the same thing, and this is how he did it. I'm happy. Long as one uh, fellow vet reads it and it helps them, not, it prevents a suicide. It helps them. I'm happy. I am completely happy. Being published and having, X amount of sales, that's just bonus because I never wrote it to make profit. I wrote it to help one myself and to help my fellow brothers and sisters in the military who are suffering from the same traumas that I experienced.
And I imagine that's got to be a difficult thing because it seems to me, and I've having talked to friends that have been serving in the military, that there is definitely certain moral codes that we are all supposed to live by, and a lot of times they are put out there by the religious institutions and all in that space. But then there is the moral codes of survival that a lot of the military folks have to deal with, and those moral codes don't always jive together, even though there are chaplains in the military and all in that space. I imagine that that's something that all the folks that go into the military, particularly those that went into war and had to do killings, have to deal with, because you are oftentimes taught that, as many of us are, thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not steal. But in the military, you oftentimes forced to do those kind of things just because of the nature of war and the nature of conflicts. I imagine that's got to be one of the biggest issues that military folks have to deal with. And having not served, I would love to hear your thoughts around that.
You're right. I mean, you deal with that. It's like when before I enlisted, I used to hunt with my family, and I used to kill deer, bear, rabbit, whatever. I'm sitting here saying, hey, I'm used to killing, and I can tell you right now, there is a big difference between when you kill a sport animal like a deer or something and killing a real person, especially when you're looking in their eyes and you see the life drained from them. And your first emotion is you're extremely happy and ecstatic that you killed them. And then it hits you of when you're watching that life drain away and you start realizing, wait a minute, I just killed something and I'm celebrating it. So you got that right there, that you have that trauma conflict of two opposing forces hitting you at the same time. Because when you're in, especially hand-to-hand combat, you only have one thought: victory, life and victory. You don't care how you achieve it. Your goal is to achieve it. And so when you do achieve it, you do have that instant feeling of victory and happiness, and then it hits you what you just did. And when it was for me, I went and talked to a friend of mine named Patrick Horty the third. He was a captain at the time, and I told him what happened. And he said to me, he goes, "Well, I can tell you. I tell you, I can't tell you how to make it easy, but what I can tell you is, if you stop feeling that after each kill, that's the time to retire." He told me. And I asked him why. He says, because if you keep feeling that, you're a human doing a job. He says, once that feeling stops, you're just a killing machine. And, that was a big thing. I mean, I can't really talk about the religious side because I've never been truly religious. I mean, I acknowledge everyone's religions. I kind of like dabble. I try to learn, I try to learn and understand like Buddhism, Hindu, Christianity. I even studied a little bit about Muslim to understand the religion. So, I know how to, work with that population. I have friends who are Hebrew, Arabic, Buddhists, and, I don't want to do something that would be offensive to them because of their religion. So I try to learn about their religions.
That makes sense. It's always good to learn about different religions and everything. I know one of the things that the network has talked about, meaning Pod TV, is around education and preparation and all in that space. So I was just wondering, because it actually was one of our other shows that we were doing. It's actually Real Girls Rock. They had some people that had either been in prison or dated folks that were prisoners on her show that was yesterday. And one of the questions that was asked was whether they were prepared to get out into the civilian world. So do you think that enough is done in the military to prepare the military for coming into the civilian world and coping with the day-to-day life? And are there, because I know there are some skill sets that you can transfer into from military to civilian life, but they don't always transfer in the same kind of way. Like the attitude of a military police is not necessarily going to be that of a regular police officer at all in that space. But I just wondered, do you think that we're doing enough to prepare our military for coming back to the civilian world?
Yeah. Actually, I'm going to be covering that in my book series as well. Um, the answer is no. I mean, when I got medically retired, the Army literally just booted me out and said, "You're a civilian now." And I was in the military since I was 17 and a half. So I spent my whole adult life having someone tell me when to get up, when to go to bed, when to eat, what to wear. Uh, and you get thrown in the civilian world. I mean, the like simple things that you guys take for granted, like when you get up in the morning and you go to put on the same clothes you wore the day before. And for the record, folks, I actually have 6 sets of the exact same clothing, so but you put the same thing in. Your wife says you can't wear that. I'm like, why? You wore that yesterday. I'm like, so I spent 28 years wearing the same thing every day, but you can't do that as a civilian. And culture shocks like that is very challenging.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just do quirky things that civilians can't understand.
No, I understand that. Speaking of quirky things, I definitely want to get into some of the military, but there is another gentleman that I was going to bring on, and they have actually dealt with bullies and bullying with the how men can cope with bullying, and we do know that that is a important issue as well. So I was going to bring on Robin as well. So Robin, if you'll share a little bit about what you've got going on, and a little bit about the work that you are doing as well, because the online dinner party, we love having folks on with various backgrounds to share their stories and all that they've got going on.
Well, thank you, Mark, for the opportunity to speak to you guys. And Alexander, what a fascinating story you have. And I have a huge respect to you for your experience and what you've been through. But my particular individual story is not nearly so interesting or glamorous, but my background is one of bullying. And I was quite young when I went to school. In terms, I was 5 years old, and my father was a church chaplain. And of course, young kids being the way they are, they don't enjoy authority being imposed upon them. And of course, my father was an archetypical authoritarian. And so, because the kids couldn't stick one on the man in terms of my father, next best thing was the son. So I used to get, carried home covered in blood on quite regular occasions, and that went on from 5 to 14. And over the years, it just destroys you from the inside out, and leaves you very numb, bereft of any real feelings of hope, self-esteem, confidence. You become a grey man. You take no risks. You try at every possible opportunity to hide from the world because you reckon you have no place in the world. And I fought with that. Well, in many ways, to some extent, I suppose I still am. But I think I've overcome most of my challenges. But it's taken all of my 58 years to do it. And so what I'm doing now is I'm using that experience and the lessons I've learned to help particularly men who have either been oppressed, bullied, abused, to overcome a lot of the self-beliefs that they have created within themselves about themselves, which no longer serve them. And frankly, were never true in the first place, but because of being overpowered and crushed by another man or a group of men, they had all of the life just squeezed out of them. And so I use a series of online video modules combined with hypnotherapy and coaching to individually help guys through the process of coming back to life again after a long period of just being caught in the dark shadows and finding that it's almost impossible to really make a name for yourself, to be realized as a real stand-up guy, because that's what we all are. We want to stand up and be counted and recognized for what and who we are. But I find that so many men, particularly younger ones these days, no longer know if they have a role in today's society. They find really that they are being pushed aside and disregarded, the grey men. And I find that desperately sad. I find that the statistics for suicide to be absolutely terrible, abhorrent. I mean, as Alexander was talking about, I think you'll find something in the region of about 75% of suicides are guys. And I would suggest to you that a portion of those are of men who have been crushed in one way, shape, or form by others. It's a process that guys will not address, really, if they can avoid it. They'll stick their head in the sand. They'll avoid it at all costs, because there's nothing worse than for a man to be seen as vulnerable. And I mean, we all give off vibes, signals through body language, attitude, stature, all the ways that people can read tells within you. And what I find is that people who have been crushed and abused and oppressed, their tells are just so obvious for all to see. And the irony is, I know, because I was giving all of them for a large part of my life. And as a result, it acted negatively in my professional career. So when I was in the aviation industry, in terms of being a businessman, I would be the fall guy for quite a few other people's misdoings. And because I was the obvious person who would not say boo to a goose, then the buck stopped with me. And I just feel that's so wrong. It really is. And so
I definitely agree with you, but one of the things I was curious about is, do you think part of it is that society has a hard time accepting the fact that, yes, men even cry and men can be sensitive and a number of other things, and that so we also sometimes can fall into something that you just alluded to, which is that people pleaser attitude. And I do know that that can be both men and women, but there is a number of times that has happened even in my life, and I'm sure that even the toughest of us, including those that have been in the military, are sometimes told to like suppress those feelings and all in that space. So I'm sure there were times that even Alexander wanted to express some of those emotions and was probably told to toughen up. And I'm only guessing that that was what was going on in the military, having some folks in the military background and everything. But do you feel, I'd love to hear from both of you, and we do have two other guests I'm going to bring on shortly as well, but I'd love to hear your thoughts as to whether that is part of the problem.
Oh, men are their own worst enemies in many ways as regards expressing emotions, because we just don't like the world to know that we have any. We want to be the Marlboro man. I mean, that's your equivalent of what I would call the milk tray man. And we all want to be supermen in the eyes of the world. We want to be able to impress our women and tell them that we've got it sorted. It's all under control. You know, just leave it to me, darling. It's all going to be all right. And then we go into the room and cry our little hearts out because we don't know how we're going to do it. We don't know how we're going to afford it. And we don't know even if we can, and we don't know how. We have an image to maintain. And our forefathers, our grandfathers, our fathers all went through the same training, and they imposed it upon us. And that's part of our upbringing. And so as a result, we're just following a natural process of not being able to live up to expectations. And for a man, that is crippling. It really is. So yeah, we don't help ourselves, but it'll take a change in culture for that to happen. But here's a final thing. Women, guys, I think you know what I'm talking about. Women test us. It's a part of their whole reason for being. And when a guy and a girl gets together, women will make little tests of us every single day, because the Queen has to test her king every single day to make sure that he's up to the job, to make sure that the Queen is safe and that she can feel comfortable in his presence, knowing that all is well, all is safe. And she tests him. But of course, what sometimes happens is that we are low, we're vulnerable, and these tests build up and build up and build up to the point whereby we just can't take it any longer. And guess what happens? Well, you explode. There's an argument, and all of a sudden you're toxic. You're unavailable emotionally. You are whatever the phrase may be of the moment. And it's just an unfortunate fact of life that that kind of relationship, that kind of interaction, it's great when you're firing on all cylinders, but when you're weak and vulnerable, as some men can be on occasions, these tests, they wear us down, and it doesn't go well.
Yeah, and definitely sometimes different people have different ways that they deal with those and everything. And speaking of women, I'm going to bring in a woman into the conversation and everything, because she actually went through an accident and went through a lot of things in her life and used mindset and meditation to deal with it. So I'm going to bring in Rosemary, and she can share a little bit of her story as well.
Sure.
So, Rosemary.
Hi, everybody. How are you?
Hey,
Great to see you guys, and great to hear you speak. And it's wonderful, to hear your point of view, and what guys go through and what you personally go through and how you perceive things, and thank you for sharing that. My dog just came back in. So my name is Rosemary, and yes, as for me, when I was 18 years old, I was in a really horrible car accident. I was just about to graduate from high school, but before I did, I had a car that I was given, and I was driving it for about 2 weeks, and it was an old car, and it stalled in the fast lane of the freeway, and me and my sister were just leaving my mom's work from visiting her, and the sun had just set, and I just remembered the cars were going by fast, and we contemplated running across the freeway and didn't look safe. So I got out of my car halfway and started waving cars to go around me. And I remember one car particularly not stopping, and my sister yelling, "Get back in the car." And that's the last thing I remember. And then about 3 days later, I woke up from a coma. I had been airlifted to a Loma Linda trauma unit. I'm in California, and I had the mindset. I remember coming out of the coma. I remember everything. Can you open your eyes, and not being able to, and barely moving the fingers. When I was finally able to come out of my coma completely, I remember having the mindset, I guess you would say, of a 5-year-old. I didn't have any. I was in la la land. I didn't know anything from which. I had no attention span. My mom would always have to be calming me down to stop talking in the background. And, I was just in la la land, and a cloud covered my brain for a good 2 years, a year and a half. And my mom took me to the neurologist, and I had flew 30 feet into the carpooling, by the way. And so I landed on my head, and I guess the type of brain injury I had was a traumatic bruised brain injury, where the doctor said my entire head is bruised, and all the cells it's like an earthquake. So it takes about 10 to 12 years to know what you're left with, to find their way home. And so that cloud that was on my brain, little did I know that, as much as I hated that cloud and it disturbed me, little did I know that cloud was protecting me from reality and realizing who I actually was, and that I had gotten a car accident, because I didn't really know. I didn't understand what was going on. And so literally one morning, a year and a half later, I wake up and I'm not in la la land anymore. I'm all of a sudden, the cloud's gone, and I feel clear and free for a second. And then all of a sudden, hell and torment just sets in. And I realized for the first time that I'm the accident Rosemary and the old Rosemary. And it's like, where did I go? For the first time, I was like, I realized I was two different Rosemarys. And from that day forward, it was just months, days, months, years upon healing, and so much torment. And I'll just also let's let you know real quick about my car accident. My sister was with me, beside me, but the amazing angelic twist in my particular situation was the car was totaled, but the seats were over the front seats. The back seats were over the front seats. My seat was practically over the steering wheel. So I don't know if I would have survived, who knows. But my sister's seat was amazingly in the exact position and condition it was before the accident. So she saw everything, and she got really bad whiplash, but she thought I was dead because, she saw my leg over my head and me bleeding and not moving and everything. So that's basically the start of my journey. And that was at 18 years old. And that was 22 years ago. That tragic yet fortunate day, I call it, was February 17th, 2001. And so here I am today, 22 years later, and I'm doing great. And a lot of healing in between those years, obviously, to get to where I am today. But I'll start there.
I appreciate it. As you were thinking about that, I was thinking about a time that I had a incident where I broke my arm and actually broke it on a fall because I was actually going to a radio station I was working at, and the buses weren't running, so I decided to be big and bold and go there on a walk, even though I knew there was slippery weather. So I literally fell, and when I fell, I broke the arm. And I remember that as the car drove back, it was literally on a not quite a highway, but like a major thoroughfare here in Germany, everything. And I remember the cars going by and people asking if I was hurt. Now I literally hurt, and I'm sure that Geyser, our good friend Alexander, can relate that if you, oftentimes when you fall, you will hear the crack and then will talk yourself out of hearing the crack. So I heard the crack, but I knew something was there, but I was talking myself into thinking that everything was all right, and wound up catching up with some government office and everything, and then they were like, "Yeah, your arm's broken, and we got to get you to the hospital," and all in that space. But one of the things I noticed was a lot of people were going by and ignoring it. Now, there were a few people that were asking if you were safe and all right, but oftentimes we will see things and either decide to gaze at them in disbelief or trying to have that onlooker attitude of trying to see how bad the accident is, but not necessarily doing enough to help and everything in that space. And I was just wondering y'all's thoughts, because I've heard of even incidences where people have been attacked and people have literally, not jumped in because of fear of the repercussions of jumping in and all in that space. So I'm thinking that is one of them cases where we probably should be doing a better job, but sometimes that gung-ho attitude that I know a lot of military folks have isn't always at the behest of everybody in the human condition. So I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts as to whether we need to be doing more awareness of our fellow human beings and even our fellow animal kingdom as well.
Well, you bring up a lot of things, and so does Robin, and as well as Rosemary. So I'm going to try to address them all without taking up too much time. In the military, yes, we have this philosophy of suck it up and drive on. If you can hold a rifle, you can kill. We don't care if you're missing an arm. Beat the enemy with your arm. And we're told we internalize a lot of stuff, and it's Robin mentioned suicide. I attempted suicide 4 times in my life, and luckily I had Sergeant Goodell with me to stop me from doing that. But the quote unquote warning signs of suicide isn't always there. I mean, sometimes people just look perfectly normal and they just do it. Like my friend I was telling you before the show, Patrick Cordy, knew him from tape 4, everything. Spoke to him day before. Next day he tried to call my cell phone. I couldn't. I was in a place that didn't have a signal, and he just killed himself that day. No sign, nothing. It is just he killed himself. And come to find out later, he was dealing with a lot of pain that he felt he couldn't talk to people about because it would ruin his image, or it would ruin how people see him. And I can relate to that. Trust me, if Sergeant Goodell was on right now, she'd be telling you about horror stories about how it took her literally with a sledgehammer to get me to talk about things and let things out. And you're right, Robin. It's disproportionately men, especially in the military. is it's a very high count, and I'm an advocate of military veteran mental health and suicide prevention. So I completely agree with that. Rosemary, I know exactly what you're talking about with TBI. I am actually a TBI survivor too. I had TBI, and it is a challenge. It is a challenge every day because when excuse me, when certain parts of your brain get damaged, you realize what you took for granted when we were quote unquote normal, and it is a challenge. You know, I got part of my brain that got injured. Deals with my scientific analytical side. So things like I used to be able to do derivatives in my head. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to do that anymore again. So I completely can relate to what it means to have a brain injury, and I am, I'm very proud and happy that you made it through it. Um,
Thank
it's a,
you. I know I'm the
so
very lucky to eventually have made it through, I will, and thank you for sharing your story too. You know, about suicide too. That's I love to help people, and that's what I do. I do some charity work, and people just are naturally drawn to me, and I naturally counsel people. It's just part of, I guess, my life experience has caused me to just be this way. And me too. I attempted suicide and I wanted to die so many different times during my years because it was just I hated myself. I hated the way I thought, and I'm a poet, and I've always been a writer. But during probably a couple of years of the darkest years, I had a journal but I didn't, it was the opposite of a beautiful poetry journal. It was a death journal. And I would write death poems and to God, and I would say, God, why did you do this to me? I hated God at the time. And in my mind, I was trying to register what was going on. I'm like, how could you do this to me? I hate you. Like, how could, and then during this particular time, like, a couple, maybe 5, 6 years after my car accident, during the healing stage I was in at that moment, or those times, I would like cut myself. And I remember I would get knives and I would just cut myself. And I remember I hated myself so much. I wanted the physical pain to match the mental pain. And I just didn't understand any of it, and I just, and one day when I did attempt to try to commit suicide, I just took a bunch of pills but luckily I didn't die. I just got really, really sick. And it took me like a long time to like just recover, just a week of like just throwing up, but like and being really sick. But so yeah, so I have a chapter in my book called Rosemary Reunites with Rosemary, and my accident was in 2001. That chapter was in like 2009. That's when I felt myself coming back the most I had felt myself in that many years. And I started to just my pain for myself started to turn into pain for other people, and I started to feel better and stuff, but I still had obviously different things going on. But I started to feel so much empathy for everyone else that it became so overwhelming that I had to eventually learn how to control that, because I just started living for everyone else instead of for myself. And then I would just basically cry every day as well. And just, so it was just an array of different stages, And so, and I started to just learn the heck out of the brain and became obsessed with the brain, just everything about it, knowing that I felt like I relived it in so many ways. And so I just, for the past 5 years, 4 or 5 years now, I would say that I've been practicing. I try to do it daily, meditation for 15 to 20 minutes. And so but during those accident years, I wouldn't have been able to meditate because I had no attention span. Even if you told me how. So, but now I am able to meditate and practice, the deliberate appreciation and mindfulness, and understand just the basic law of physics of basically like what changed my mindset in a big way too was just learning the simple physics that our thoughts are energy, and every thought vibrates at a certain frequency, and then finding the frequency chart, and then emotions are energy flows where energy goes, focus on the good and the good gets better. Just and then when I started understanding that, and I always have a choice, because, I had to retrain my brain, because at that point, like 5 years ago, I was just like so negative, and I was focused more on the negative than the positive. I didn't know how, but then when I realized I had a choice and there are more tools and techniques that I can practice. And when I started to deliberately practice the meditation and the mindfulness and focusing it, on what could go right rather than what could go wrong, and understanding there is a mind game to it and we have more power. I would say about 3 months of deliberately just, I was so bad. I was just like, I'm all in, and I had really bad fibromyalgia at that time too. And so I just I just made myself do it. Just like I just made myself meditate. Just okay, even if how times and anyways, I eventually healed myself of the fibromyalgia, probably maybe a year later or something. But and just reading other people's story on how the mind body connection and how they did, and just kept learning tools and techniques and practicing energy work and helping other people, visualization. I love doing visualizations and helping other people when I
Appreciate
can.
it. Definitely appreciate it. I brought in Jim as well. Jim is a entrepreneur, and I know a lot of times mindfulness is also an important part of that as well. I know he's been there listening to the conversation and all in that space. And I do know that even in the entrepreneurial lane, it can oftentimes be a lane of people pleasing as well. Because I do know that there have been some entrepreneurial projects that I have been brought on to, and sometimes I wonder, am I living the dream of the fellow entrepreneur, or am I actually putting it into my own dreams and everything? And there have been times that I've had to back out, or been in the process of backing out, because I'm going like, that's not necessarily my vision, that's your vision, and all in that space. So as an entrepreneur, how do you cope with that, Jim? And if you could share a little bit about your story, because I do know that the people pleasing and the mindfulness is something that entrepreneurs deal with as well.
Absolutely, they do, Mark. And thank you for having me join today. Great group. Robin, Rosemary, Alexander, thank you for your service. Appreciate that deeply. Yeah, the entrepreneurial world is not immune from any of the things that we've been discussing. I mean, my story of real growth began with me losing a business, failing so miserably and so publicly that I felt the only option was to jump off a very tall building, which I didn't do, fortunately. My two dogs followed me up the stairs that night about 2 a.m, and I heard them barking behind me, and they were just enough of a distraction to get me down off the edge of that roof. But that's where the journey really began, learning to forgive myself, learning to understand that there is life after failure, and that I could create a new chapter in my life and go on and begin to help other business owners craft a better balance in their work-life approach, using mindfulness, using meditation, using these powerful tools that everyone has been talking about, to approach things in a way that allows them to thrive both physically, emotionally, spiritually, and financially. And that's the reward of the work that I get to do today.
Yeah, no doubt. Hey, Jim, along those same lines, I was just wondering about the business failure, because I do know that there are tremendous amount of failures. Certain businesses, it's like ridiculous how many of them fail. I'm thinking about my friends in the restaurant business and in some other businesses as well. And you just kind of alluded to the fact that sometimes those failures really weigh on us in terms of our mental and emotional state and all in that space. I was wondering if you could share some of the advice that you give to fellow entrepreneurs, because the odds of you making it as an entrepreneur are not all that great, depending on what the business that you're going into.
Well, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's incredible challenges, and many businesses do fail. But I think more and more, particularly the businesses that I work with, what we see is the better you are at anticipating and planning ahead, anticipating some of the challenges. I got broadsided at a point in my business. I had a staff of 15. We had a business that was working internationally. We had 2 offices. And then out of the blue, the economy turned in 2008, going into 2009. And in response to it, I did the thing that I thought was the smart move. I had equity in my home. I called the bank and said, let me draw out that equity and we'll just keep the business afloat with that for however long. And 4 months later, the real estate bubble burst in Los Angeles, and I was upside down on about $2 million worth of property that I couldn't sell, and I lost everything. So I allowed my personal finances to commingle with my business finances, and that's what bit me in the ass. And there was no coming back from that. And so I learned a very powerful lesson. And a big part of what I do today in helping businesses is to create and help them establish business credit based on their EIN number, having nothing to do with their personal. No one ever signs a personal guarantee on a business loan if they're working with me, because that allows that corporate veil to be pierced, and it just opens businesses up to difficulties that they don't have to. There's enough other challenges in running a business, marketing and sales and staffing and all those other things. You don't need to be worrying about commingling of funds or being responsible for business debts that have nothing to do with your personal life. So
do you think that, and this is for everybody, do you think that we can do a better job of teaching a lot of this stuff that we've been talking about, whether it is mental health or business knowledge or a number of other things in our school system? Because I do remember there was a time that vocational education was big in schools. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I was thinking when I was thinking about this particular group of folks was when I was in high school, you pretty much had three options. There might have been a fourth option, but you didn't really want to go down that alley because that was kind of the illegal alley. But most of the people were either thinking that they were going to go after high school automatically to work, going into the workforce. They were going to go, as Alexander did, into the military, or they were going to go to some form of higher education, whether that was college, community college, or whatever that form of higher education was. But even in those institutions, I don't know that they do enough to teach us life skills. Like I said, I do remember that book, What Color is Your Parachute? And I definitely read it as a youngster, but I don't know how many people actually have those life skills to deal with all of these different things that we've been talking about on this show on a regular basis. So would you, all four of you, like to see greater things in our school systems? And I know that you're not necessarily in the United States, Robin, and everything, but I think that it is something that is worldwide. I think it is a worldwide issue and all in that space. I'd love to hear your thoughts as to whether we can do a better job with our education system.
Yeah, you hit a good point. I think that our education system has failed our society immensely because they went away from teaching life essential skills to teaching things that really shouldn't even be taught in schools. And at inappropriate grade ages, things that should be dealt with at the family level. It was so bad here in my state, New Hampshire. We actually had to pass a law to tell the public school system, you're going to teach kids how to write cursive, how to balance a checkbook, how to have these life skills that the school system went on this. Not to be political, but the only way I can describe it is through a political analogy. They went to a very liberal, progressive way of teaching things, and they left behind really life essential things. I mean, we have kids who graduate high school who can't sign legal documents because they never learned how to write cursive. We have kids who can't balance a checkbook, things like that, and when you talk to them, they're like, well, they never taught that to me. So I think there's definitely room for growth. I turn it to the floor to everyone else.
Yes. Robbie, what's your thoughts? Because you're in a different part of the world, but are they doing better in your part of the world?
Oh, I don't think so. No, I think we're all just equally screwed one way or another. To be honest with you guys, the one thing that jumps to mind when you talk about mental health for all age groups right just now, and what I'm experiencing now is quite a big kickback against the mental health awareness lobby, if you want to call it that. I suppose you'd call it mental health awareness fatigue. I think there's a lot of people getting sick of hearing about mental health. I think there's a lot of people who would just rather it all went away, and they just find it all a little bit inconvenient. People should just toughen up, get a thicker skin, get on with it, be a man, be a whatever it is. In my day, that's what they would say. They wouldn't do all of this sort of looking after you nonsense, and they would have made a tough guy out of you by the fact that you either got the living hell beaten out of you, or you just had to endure one thing or another that you just didn't want to do. I think there's still a strong prevalence of that opinion going around, certainly amongst the older generation. Conversely, there is also the point of view that there's a sort of anti-millennial generation who look at the young people with absolute disdain. Uh, I think it's fairly safe to say that the young generation have a very different experience of school and upbringing to. Well, I'm 58, so I suspect a millennial and I would have very different experiences of life. And so people of my age can quite easily judge the youngsters and say, oh, you need to get this sorted, you need to do that, you need to do better. But of course, we grew up in a certain context with support coming from different directions, whereas now kids are growing up in a very digital age where the contact with human beings is minimal, and the contact they do have is usually via telephone. So we've lost all contact with the traditional tribal connections that we would have once had. And a lot of people don't see their suffering, they don't see their pain, and they just think they're a bunch of weak-willed whingers. And I truly feel sorry for them because, guys, whose fault is it? Ours, because it's our generation that created these people, and we allowed the digital generation to grow up the way they did. And I don't think we have any right to be fatigued when it comes to mental health awareness, but it's there, guys. It's there.
I definitely agree with you on that. One thing that I'd love to hear Jim and Rosemary's thoughts about this is actually Rosemary kind of alluded to it early and everything is I sometimes think, and this may sound as a shock, but I enjoy these conversations and a lot of the other conversations that I've had with a number of folks over the several years or 3 years of dealing with Pod TV and even doing reporting before that in different institutions and different outlets and all of that, that maybe normality is a little bit overrated because sometimes I think that we all have a little bit of abnormality to us and we probably need to kind of honor the fact that we all have a little bit of insanity in our brains and in our thoughts. And I don't know that we actually give that enough just dues and everything because everybody wants everybody to be totally sane. And I wrote a short story a long time ago, and it was actually a mental patient talking to his counselor. And in the course of the conversation, he was talking about all the things that were going wrong. And this was written in the 80s and 70s. So we're talking about the Watergate era and pollution and a number of other things. And his argument was at the end of the day, who is the real insane ones, the ones that we are calling sane or the ones that we're putting in the institutions for the insane and all in that space. So that was kind of the nature of that particular short story is that we might be labeling those that are insane, those that are really creative, and those that are creative may be some of those that are the most sane. So like I jokingly said, I don't know that I would know what to do if I ran into somebody that wanted to claim that they were entirely sane because I would wonder about their own sanity. So that would be the first thing that would come to my mind is if they're telling me that they're totally sane, how sane are you really? So I'll start with you, Alexander, since you're in the creative space, but what is your notion when you hear people that are accentuating the fact of their sanity?
Yeah, good topic. Speaking as from personal experience is we say to ourselves that we're normal and we're sane to hide how we really feel, whether it's from self-shame, self-embarrassment, whatever. I mean, I can tell you, I didn't start getting treatment for my PTSD and other issues until like well past 15 years after these traumatic events. And, and I kept saying to myself in those early years, well, I'm just normal. I'm just having a bad day. I'm normal. I'm just didn't have my coffee. And, it came to a point where, something exploded in my life where my friends, basically hogtied me and dragged me into the vet center to start having counseling about my PTSD. That's a story I'll talk about later. But get to Robin's point as well. The thing about teaching, mental health and sanity, and there's a fatigue because my philosophy on why there's a fatigue is that the mental health stuff that they teach isn't practical or helpful. Case in point, the suicide prevention classes. I can tell you from personal experience, that what they teach in there is not anything that's really practical to prevent a suicide. It really doesn't. I mean, and so people keep getting trained on this stuff, and they get to a point where it's sort of like they just turn it off in their head. They're just, I'm going to this class to check the box because my company told me to, or I'm going to check the box because the government said I had to do it. Instead of teaching the true life skills needed to help people with mental health. The biggest thing to help people with mental health is talking to them.
Mm-hmm.
Talking to them. I mean, and I don't mean like how we're talking now. I mean, to be aware, to be in present and talking to them,
Right.
and letting them know that you're not just saying hi because everyone who passes the street says hi to each other. You're saying hi because you acknowledge that person's existence, and you want to hear his story.
Yeah.
Sorry if I took too much of your time.
No, not at all. Hey, Jim, along those same lines, and I'd love to hear, and definitely anybody else got any thoughts on this. I do know that sometimes that notion of sanity comes into the space of entrepreneurs as well, because some people will be like, you have to be slightly crazy to even think that you want to run a business of any sort and everything in that space. But the other thing that I've heard a lot of entrepreneurs talk about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, but everybody else can jump on it as well, is oftentimes, there's these voices in our head that we're listening to as well. And it's not like the voices that were in the sense of sanity voices and all of that space, but it's those voices of consciousness. Because sometimes we will have those inner critics that'll tell you, and I'm sure they told you when you were starting those various businesses of yours, you have got to be crazy. There is no way that we're going to make any success in this business. Why do you think that you want to have this business with all of these people? And I'm sure there are people in your family that were also doing the same thing. So I was curious as to how you deal with that inner critic, because we all have that inner critic that is telling us all the reasons that we shouldn't do things. And entrepreneurs oftentimes hear that inner critic even more than the rest of us do. So how did you deal with that? And how did you deal with those outer critics as well? Because I'm sure that there are people in your circle that were sitting there with your various businesses. And I do know there have been a multitude of them that you were probably going, and they were going like, no, that's not going to work. That's not going to fly. Why are you even bother trying to get that business off the ground?
The struggle with the inner critic, the gremlins that would undermine anything we do, anything, whether it's business or personal, it's an ongoing battle. It's a daily battle. I'm constantly reframing the thoughts that come into my head to circumvent the stories that my gremlins are telling me that predict nothing but doom and destruction and failure. Because I have learned over time that isn't the case, that I don't have to believe those thoughts, and that I do have options. So reminding ourselves about the options that we have, that there can be positive outcomes, becomes critical. Very critical.
Rosemary, what about you? I'm sure that there were people that even as you were bouncing back from recovery that were probably sitting there telling you that there was no way that you would bounce back as strongly as you have. And to Robin's point, I'm sure there are people, because you are actually of a younger age range, and even at the time of the accident, they were not necessarily giving that youth voice, which you kind of represent, as well as much of a voice as it should have. Because I'm actually of the opinion that the youth are doing really well, and considering what they've been through, I think that y'all are doing tremendously well. Because I think of people, I have two nephews. They will be 14 and 15 in August. So they were born in the same month, but a year apart and everything. And I know that they did not go through 9/11, but if they'd been in 2001, they would have. But they did go through earthquakes. They did go through that whole military conflict over there in the Middle East. They have gone through the pandemic. They've gone through everything. And I'm thinking to myself, if I had been at their age at the time of all of this stuff going on, I'm not sure that I would have not had some of the issues that they say our youth are having, because I'm going through it. Like, how did y'all even cope for those that were born in 2001? And I know you were born before then, but I'm going like some of what they have gone through. I just find it's a miracle that more of them are not checking out in one form or fashion.
Gosh, you know what? That question and the question that you had asked earlier about changing in the school systems and what we think school systems aren't, what they're not doing, and even it all intertwines with even what you're saying now, and it's intuition. Because I also have a nephew that's 13 and a niece that's 14. She's going to start high school next year or this year, and then the nephew will, start high school the year after that. And oh my God, my nephew's been through his own hell. Like, but that's a different topic. We only have 30 more minutes. And so he's only 12, and I actually have helped him overcome a lot too.
Hold on one second, Rosemary. Oh, I was going to get Jim to give his contact, but he had to bounce. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So my nephew's a totally different story, but he would even play good in this mind-body connection, because since I had learned about the mind-body connection, I got to teach him things when he was diagnosed with something, and it's amazing how he's doing today. So that would be a totally different topic. But intuition, as to this question, with, let's see, entrepreneurship, because me too, and with my book, like, and back at school, let me just try to make these mesh. To the school question, I believe that schools need to teach intuition as a huge thing, because I know for a fact now that I wouldn't have gotten my car accident if I knew that I could trust that inner voice and that inner knowing. I just didn't know it meant anything. I truly believe that intuition is a sixth sense, and it's part of us, and it guides us. It's our divine guidance through life when should go this way, we shouldn't go this way. It's our survival. It's that reflex. It's just not even the reflex. I had an inner knowing that I shouldn't drive that car, and I did. Looking back now, though, if I knew about intuition and I was taught that in school, I would have never drove that car. Therefore, I would have never gotten an accident. And even with my book, coming to the current question, with my book, I can't tell you how many people thought I was crazy and didn't think that maybe I was smart enough to write a book, or maybe that I had, because I've always been a writer and a poet and a songwriter, but for who knows, there was people just like, oh, are you sure you want a book? Or they were scared about what I was going to say. But I had this inner voice, again, not and then we talk about the sane and insane. We're all, that's a different topic too. There's so many intertwines, but I had this inner knowing that you might as well be dead if you don't write this book. It was that strong, and it was just calling me. It really got strong in 2015, to the point where it's like, you have no other reason to live. Yeah, you have family, you have animals, and they love you and you love them. But I didn't feel a sense of purpose for so long. And for so long, I was just fighting to be me again. That's the name of my book, San Gabriel Valley Girl, Fighting to Be Me Again. And I wanted to finally feel a part of this world and a part of society, and feel alive and fulfill a purpose. And so I just had this, I guess that's that inner voice that you talk about, and that gut. And it would so eventually I followed, some people call it a calling. I eventually followed it, and I accepted the assignment, if you want to say. I'm not religious, but I'm very spiritual, and that's another topic on top of that. So there's so many, but so I and then, I trusted, and I said, okay, guide me. And eventually I'm like, how am I going to write a book? I write poems, I write everything, but I never wrote a book. And then I cried one day, and I got a feeling to go to Barnes & Noble, and I saw this book falling off the shelf, and it was The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, and I felt a strong connection to it. So I brought it home. I did the 8-week course, and that book gave me the open valve, if you will, to accept spirit or source, however you want to call it, to speak through me. And from then on, I just 8 hours a day just wrote. And then I only got like probably 30% of my book actually got published, because I wrote so much. And finally, when I took it to people, like, no one's going to read this whole book, because I long wrote everything. And so I had to cut down many stories to make it an actual sellable autobiography, because that's really what it is. It's an autobiography, not a memoir, because it's from the day I was born until today. And it's a lot of, so.
We definitely got a lot of things. We'll definitely have to get people to get that book and everything. Hey, Alexander, you mentioned earlier about that whole notion of falling through the floor. And we do have about 20, 25 minutes to go. So I do know that we like to have comedy in addition to the drama and everything. So if you can share a little bit about that falling through the floor as well, and definitely how that transpired, because I'm going like, how does one manage to fall through the floor and actually survive it and all in that space? Because as you were describing it before, I'm going like, wait a minute, if I had fallen through the first floor, I'd be trying to like grab onto something, but that's just being my survival mentality.
Well, thank you. I'll bring it up. And Rosemary, writing a book, speaking from experience, is one of the best ways for healing. And like I wrote my book not for profit or publishing, but to help other veterans who feel like me. So I commend you in writing a book. It is a self-enriching goal, and I'm proud of you doing that.
I commend you too, and ultimately that was my goal too, to help other people, and that by telling my story and what I've learned from my experience. Life experience sure is the best teacher, isn't it?
Okay, speaking about experiences, Sergeant Goodell, if you're in the viewership, feel free to comment in the chat box. But back in OEF, I was with a special team, and I was with Sergeant Goodell, and I kind of had this false belief that if you're a leader, you go first. You never give a command. Well, no, it's not a false belief. You never give a command that you wouldn't follow yourself. But the false belief was that I should take point because I'm the leader. And so we get to a bit where we're sieging into a building. We blow the door, and I go spinning out to go take point and clear the room. I took one step, and the floorboard I stepped on broke, and I felt we were on the second floor. I fell all the way to the first floor.
Oh gosh.
Then it broke my fall, and then before I could get up, it broke, and I fell all the way down to the basement.
Oh dear. Oh.
And Sergeant Goodell looks all the way down the hole going, I think you need a new plan. And I censored what he really said, but you get the point.
Gosh.
Yeah, you might need a new plan after you go through following both of those and everything. Well, the other thing,
Wow.
Alexander, is that I was curious about is I know some of our folks were very much about that image kind of stuff, and I did notice that you have that Stetson. So if you could share a little bit about how that Stetson is part of your imagery as well, and how that came about and all in that space.
Well, first, this is not given; it's earned. You have to pass through United States Army Armor and Cav School to earn the privilege of having this. So I wore this most of my military career. When I came out, I would only wear it when I was going out and things, but it wasn't just, it's kind of, I just wore it because I wanted to wear a hat and my favorite hat. I went to an author event with other authors, military science fiction authors and things like that. And I was wearing this, and everyone said, hey man, that is you, that's your thing. He goes, when you go out in public as an author, wear the Stetson because that's your image. That's what you are now. And I'm like, so I've kind of embraced the concept of, okay, if I'm going to be in my author persona, make sure I have the Stetson because that's how the public sees me.
Yeah. Hey, Robin, we've heard both Rosemary and Alexander mention books that they have written. So are you in that book writing club, or is that a book writing club that you're going to try to give us from the Scottish side and everything? And is that something that is on your wish list?
Well, I jumped into that bandwagon as well some time ago. What I haven't mentioned is I used to fly for the airlines for 20 years. I was an airline captain for 20 years, and
Oh wow.
during that time, I loved my job, but I noticed that there was a lot of people struggling in it in a sort of just life sense, and as Alexander was saying, when you operate in very stressful circumstances, there's no real space for emotions and for bleeding hearts. You just got to do the job and do it well, because if you don't, people die. And I was working in Italy at the time for an Italian airline, and COVID kicked in, and so of course the first thing that happens is when the airline stopped flying, they get rid of the foreigners, don't they? And of course, I was as foreign as you could get. So the idea was that I would just stay at home for a while and then figure out what to do next. And ta-da! I wrote a book. I wrote a book for all the people that were going to replace me when COVID was resolved. And I knew that there'd be recruiting like mad, and there'd be a whole lot of new blood coming into the industry who never had really gone through what I had gone through. And it was almost like one of the presidents leaving a note inside the desk saying, "Don't screw it up." And so I wrote a book, "Don't Screw It Up. This is how I did it." And so I called it Life Resource Management. And it was on Amazon for quite a few months, and it got to #1 in aviation in the UK for a wee while. And I was quite proud of that. But I certainly didn't become a millionaire overnight, long way from it.
What advice would you give to folks that are getting into the airline industry? Because the airline industry seems like the cruise industry and the other ones are bouncing back. I do remember that on the audio podcast, I had the pleasure of interviewing a stewardess who is from North Carolina, and she was talking about some of the strange things that were on the planes, because she actually wrote a book called Dear Passenger. I can't think of her name off the top of my head, but she was talking about like finding kangaroos literally on the plane. So there was like an incident that she had where the kangaroo was on the flight, and there were some other things that were on the flight as well that were interesting in that particular book that she wrote. But what were some of the unusual things that happened in your flight experiences?
Oh, well, I mean, we've had all sorts of crazy stuff happen. I mean, when you put people inside a tube and then take the air out of it, as you do when you get to 40,000 feet, people do dumb stuff. I mean, people trying to have sex in a very, very tight space, and oh dear, it's just not pretty. You get people who've had too much to drink and they just don't know when to stop. Alcohol really has changed aviation in a big way, but it also, how can I put this delicately? In the 50s and 60s, the ability to travel by plane was a very rich man, rich woman's way of travel. Now, with the bucket airlines, anybody goes. And as a result, you've got people that probably should have been kicked out of a bar getting on an airplane. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, it has the expected results, but no, my career was wonderful. I had a great time. I had wonderful experiences, and so anybody coming into the aviation world now will still have an amazing career. I can't really express well enough, and maybe Alexander will understand this, the concept of crew or teamwork. It's a sort of brother and sisterhood that is sort of combined under strange circumstances. You're not normally people that would come together under social circumstances, but you're brought together to do a job under very stressful conditions where people might die if you get it wrong. Yeah. And that brings people together in a way that you don't get, selling newspapers in a shop or some other sort of more stress-free, that's unfair, but the kind of thing I mean, in different conditions. So yeah, the concept of crew is something that these new people will experience, and it is truly wonderful. People have got your back, people support you. And then the final thing in aviation is that it's all to do with safety, and everybody works together to ensure that the flight is 100% safe. And everybody works together in order to achieve that. In business, that was not the case. I mean, everybody was stabbing each other in the back, right, left, and center, crawling on each other's shoulders, couldn't be aggressive enough to try and get above you one way or t'other. Aviation and flying, that's not my experience. There is no clawing up the ladder. It's a slow process to get where you want to be, but it's a process of earning your spurs. And I think that I understand what that hat means to you, Alexander. Sorry if it's not a hat, but you know what I'm saying.
I
So yeah, it's an amazing future for anybody going in there, but it's got its challenges. It's going to have challenges in every way sense. We're talking about having pilotless aircraft now, or single pilot aircraft. You can imagine what my opinion on that's going to be, but it may well happen. And then, of course, what happens when the pilot goes? Do the crew go as well?
So we're gonna have AI. We're gonna have AI flown planes or robot flown planes, and no longer the regular folks that are going to be flying it. Not sure how I feel
Well,
about
I hope it's
there
not.
you
They're
go.
not using Windows, I hope.
And telling you how to put the mask on, and it's going to all be automated or robot telling you.
It could well be. I hope to God it's not, but there you
Me
go.
too.
The future's bright. Anything's possible.
it. Anything is possible, even in the airline industry. So that could be a scary thought. So that could be one of the subjects of one of Alexander's science fiction novels. It can be the planes are being run by other folks and all in that space.
You know, you kind of steal my thunder here because I actually have that in my first book.
You just psychically pick that up.
You guys didn't even read the book and you know what's in it.
This is those psychic abilities, good journalists, those psychic abilities and all in that space. But we've winded down, got another 10 or 15 minutes to go. But one of the things I get everybody to do, and I definitely have enjoyed all four of you on this time just as much as I enjoyed last week and everything.
Uh-oh, Mark's disappeared.
Uh-oh. He must be having Comcast issues.
Could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do they say? He's in the Matrix.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I got Comcast, so you know, they do mean things to me during my stream, so I just learned to just accept the fact. It's like the old Marbell system.
Oh no. So he's just paused and hi, we're here just to let you know we can see you still.
Yeah, but Rosemary, yeah, I think, you know, and I'll say this as an author who finished one and going on a second book. I would highly encourage you to do a sequel to that book to expand on what you feel and do. I mean, like my story, I can't fit it in 3 books. I mean, 1 book. I have to break it up into 3 books because there's so much I want to share and tell people that you know, and I want to do it in a way that they just don't blow by it and read it. It's more of they read it and they digest it and they see the meaning behind the words, not just the words. And I think you have that same thing with your story, and I highly recommend get a second book and start that, and you'll find that even working on the second book, you'll find much more healing. I'm finding much more healing working on the second book than I did with the first book.
Wow, that's amazing, and thank you for the advice. And I also just this year in January, it took all last year. I was narrating my book and doing the Audible version, and it came out in January. So I have an Audible of my book as well that I'm narrating, and it really was a wonderful experience because I got to just embody all Rosemary's from. And it was, and even like my family, or just if I did some of like my voices and stuff, like my dad wears a hat. He's part Native American, like his dad and everything. So my dad always wears a hat, kind of similar to you. He wears, when I see him, and it has feathers on it, and he wears, but it's a hat like that, and he wears it a lot, and it has an eagle feather, and he just I don't know. So it reminds me a little bit when I see that hat. Just think, because I never really seen anyone else wear a hat like that besides my dad until you today. I mean, I'm trying to see if I can see you perfectly. Like but I see do you have a feather on your hat?
Nope.
Okay, no. So
this is I'm wearing the Army issue. I have a little braid and I have my armor symbol.
Okay, yeah, no, it's cool. It's really cool. But and so do you only wear it when you're talking about author? Oh, he's back.
I wear it.
I'm back.
Hey, welcome back, Mark.
Hi, you're back.
Yeah, you gotta love technology. Technology has a mind of its own and all in that space. But as I was trying to get everybody to do as we were winding down is to share how they can be reached and also their positive message that they would like to share.
Oh no. He's gone
Well,
again.
At least he was able to say, that.
What he wants us to do.
as
Exactly.
Okay.
well, and how you can be reached as well.
To answer
there
your question, Rosemary, I wear the hat all the time now. People, you can reach me several ways. You can reach me on Facebook via my fan page called Imperial Command. You can reach me on Twitter as Geister author _author. You can get me on Instagram as Geister the author. You can also find me on LinkedIn as my name _ the author. And so I'm very available. You can send emails to my publishing company at odat@valkyriefury.com. So thank you for having me on, Mark. Thank you, Robin.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just really quickly before I get to Robin, how easy do you think it is to be published? Because I know a lot of people are trying to self-publish, and some people are trying to go the publishing route. So which would you advise people to do if you were to give advice in that sense? Do you think that it's best to do the publishing route or to self-publishing route?
Well, I from experience and talking to other authors, self-publishing is the way to go. Direct to digital, it's direct to the number 2 and digital. They are one of the pristine, most self-publishing sites. They don't want any money up front. They only take a commission off per sale. So I'm using them. That's how I'm gonna publish my paperback and ebook using direct to digital, and I'm shooting for a 30th June public release date, and I'm hoping to have pre-orders open by June 1st.
Wonderful. That's
You've got this all sorted out, haven't you?
awesome.
Trial and error, and many errors.
Yeah. And you got to just believe in that, still keep believing, and just got to feel your purpose, and you're doing awesome. And thank you for your service as well. And thank you for your book and everything. And you guys are great, awesome people. And then Robin, is that right? Robin,
That's
right?
right.
And then, it was nice to hear how you had, relationships with your women, and I hope that in the future you will get with the woman who isn't those ways, I guess if you think about it, they're talking about like everybody's the same insanity. I guess there's just in males and in females, there's just everyone has their own. Either they're in alignment or they're not, or some people are lost there's just so many different.
Of
We just all are
course.
doing the best we can, and I guess there's.
Well, there's some common denominators, Rosemary, that we all can deal with, and that's where I come in, because I can attract people's attention to those common denominators and say to them, have you considered this? Have you looked at that? And does it serve you? Does it work for you? And if not, what would you like to do about it? So I've gone from an airline captain to a hypnotherapist in about 4 years. It's been an exciting ride, and I get to see the variations in people, but they do have so much in common. And I tell you, the big things right just now are depression and anxiety. We're living in a time when things are just so upside down, and it's not great for people. And so anybody who's struggling out there right just now, I respect what you're going through, and I hope you get the therapy you need. But Rosemary, I've got to ask you, when you were writing your book, did you find that there were things that you came across that at the time hadn't really struck you, but by the act of writing the book, it brought out thoughts and ideas and feelings that you'd kind of crushed or, put away in a dark room somewhere?
Yes, definitely. Yes, I channeled as much as I could through the beginning childhood to today, and it was and I got very deep and in depth and raw, and definitely, and it was very healing, and also it's even also it's I have people that have read my book. It makes me feel amazing. Just when one person gives me a review and says, "Your book helped me so much," or "If you could do it, I could do it," or um, this one, like people message me. It won't be so many reviews. Maybe like 20 different people have hit me up and said, like just, and it feels like every time I get a review that like that, it just feels like I won the lottery or I won an award because it's so rewarding because I
Oh
knew
yeah.
my intention when I wrote the book and it was to ultimately help other people. And so when I get that when I get that feedback that I knew my intention was when I wrote it, it is the most rewarding feeling. And of course, I want to be able to get my book, and I'm trying to market. I'm in the middle of my website right now and working with people, and I'm trying to do as much marketing as I can and go further with getting my book out there to more people. But the people that it has reached, just knowing that it's so rewarding. And um,
Well done, Rosemary. And I suppose, given the technical problems we're experiencing now, maybe if you just want to reconfirm the name of your book and how people can go ahead and get it.
Sure, I have a copy right here too. It's called San Gabriel Valley Girl, Fighting to Be Me Again. And that girl was me when I was 17. Those were pictures actually taken about 6 months before my car accident. And so that was the girl I say fighting to be me again.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I don't have my website name right now, but you can find, this is my Rosemary Beatriz Montoya. It's my grandma's middle name. I gladly use it. Um, and that's my Facebook name. And I have two Instagram. A third one's coming, but right now I have an inspirational Instagram account that's just about positive energy, and it's SGV Girl 143. And then I have my own personal one that is about my book and also my life and family and just me, who I am, and that's Rose Petal 2278. And I I have I guess I have a Twitter account. I don't go on as much, and a LinkedIn account. Um, and yeah, maybe, but you guys, and yeah, and we got his information. And then what about your information as well?
Well, for me, my little business is called One Small Step Hypnotherapy, and you can bet it's all to do with flying, can't you? First step on the moon, one small step for man. And my website is robinferrier.co.uk. And like your good selves, I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and there's probably a few other things as well that I haven't even remembered to say. But I'm just grateful to everybody for your time today. Thank you for your company, and thank you particularly to Mark for allowing me to join you all.
Yes,
Appreciate it,
thank you.
everybody. And
Market
definitely
that.
going to get everybody. Yeah, technology had a moment of its own that happens in the world. And like I said, I'm getting ready to bounce and get to my next event and all in that space. But the last thing, and if you can do it quickly, if anybody has their message of positivity and hope that they would like to give to the world, I'd definitely love to hear that. If you've got a 1 sentence or 2 sentence message of hope that you want to live our global community. And other than that, we're ready to get on out of here.
What I would say is, if you have PTSD and things like that, write a book. Two, if you are thinking about wanting to be an author, well, I'll tell you right now, write the first word on the paper. Just do it. Get a pen, get a keyboard, and just do it. And that's my good word for the population.
Appreciate you, Robin.
For any guys, particularly guys struggling with with anything to do with the mind, I would like you to understand that you're not a victim. You never were, and you certainly never will be. I just to reach out when you find the courage to say I need some help, and it will be provided, maybe by me or by some other, but you've got to ask. And as Alexander was saying, be open to discussion and to talking. All I would say is be careful who you choose to talk to. That's my thoughts for today. Thank you for your time, everyone.
Appreciate it. Rosemary, really quickly, and then that'll wrap it up. I'll hit the 30-second spot after yours, and we'll get ready to get out of here and have another dinner party on next weekend. I would definitely hope that all 4 of you will make return trips, because I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and hope that you will make return trips to the dinner party and to Pod TV as well.
I would
If
be
that's an
honored.
open invitation,
would
I'm going to
be
make every
honored.
effort, and
We're
I'll
so
email you if I can.
all of you, and yes, that would be wonderful. And just no matter where you are in life right now, everybody, whoever's listening to this too shall pass. And if you're not where you want to be, just know, if you just do the best you can in this moment and believe in better days and just imagine them, and if you can, walk, get out of your mind, and appreciate birds. It sounds simple, or it sounds ridiculous sometimes, but just get out of your mind and change the subject. Think better feeling thoughts and do what feels better. Try to do that more of the time, and it gets easier with time, and we've got to retrain that mind. And yes, seek help. Please don't ever think you're in it alone. There's always someone who will help you, like me or any one of these gentlemen on stage.
I appreciate it. Like I said, we're going to hit that 30-second spot and get on out of here. We'll be back on the other shows. We got Sharon Campbell coming. Actually, today is Wednesday. So, yeah, we've actually got Grant McCall that'll be coming with his Follow the Brand show. And then, of course, we've got World Edition later on and some other shows as well. So keep your eyes and ears located at podtv.tv. And we'll be back with more shows later on this evening.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good
See
day.
you guys.
Yeah.
Bye.